With that said, let's close out the service today with some thoughts from the Scripture, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 16 today. So if you have a Bible or an iPhone, you want to jump to Psalm 16 or use a pew Bible, you're welcome to do that, because we'll kind of read through the whole psalm together a little bit here. But basically, let me just explain to you where I'm going this morning. So the overview would be, there's two parts to what I'm going to talk to you about briefly here. One is the quest for joy. We're talking about joy, we're talking about anticipation, and so I want us to think about this quest for joy as opposed to just joy being an immediate thing. Joy is less like a microwave, 30 seconds, boom. And it's more like the intentional building of a fire and the stoking of a fire. And at times, joy, when I was growing up as a kid, we would go to my grandpa's house for Christmas, and he had this big old fireplace. And I remember as a kid, one of the most fun things to do was to use the bellow. You guys know what I'm talking about? And I didn't have any other place where a bellow mattered except my grandpa's house, and so we'd always love to play with the bellow because you could stick it in the fire and or you could put it in your cheeks and blow your cheeks up. That was fun too. But I just thought that was the coolest thing, that bellow. But what it does is you put it in a flame that's kind of dying, and you get some air in there, and then all of a sudden, you have this inflaming kind of moment, which is pretty cool. And that kind of is how Christmas is supposed to work as we build the fire of Advent slowly, methodically. And if you know how to correctly build a fire, you know what I'm talking about. You don't just dump a bunch of wood down and, like I do sometimes, pour gasoline over it and light it. That's not the right way to light a campfire, at least. You stack the small kindling, in the bottom, and you kind of build it with airflow, and it kind of gets bigger as it goes. My daughter Grace is a little bit OCD about this, about building campfires, but when you see somebody do it well, it's pretty cool because it starts small and then it kind of builds to the heat intensifies as the bigger logs are inflamed. That's kind of how Advent is supposed to work. It's supposed to be this building of emotional intensity toward joy at the end. And I'm hoping that if you journey with us from the shadows to the light of Christ, that Christmas won't just be for you. You open the presents, you drink the eggnog, and woo, that was good. Okay, we're done for another year. That moment won't be like that for you. Have you experienced that before? I mean, the presents are, the houses are wrecked, the wrapping paper's everywhere, all the cookie crumbs are everywhere. Everybody's got their eggnog, it's done, and now it's like, now what? And it's just kind of like this emptiness. I used to experience that as a kid a lot. And that's partly because we didn't celebrate Advent. So I think that Advent helps you prepare for a fuller experience of joy in the coming of Christ, in the glory of the incarnation. And that's why Christmas is, from the church calendar perspective, a 12-day celebration. But in order for that joy to be, such a momentum that 12 days, you can have joy for 12 days, there has to be this build, I think, out of the shadows into the light. And so I want us to kind of look at two illustrations of this. One from Psalm 16 as an illustration of what this joy cultivation looks like, and then one from one of my favorite theologians, scholars, writers, whose name is C.S. Lewis. If you don't know him, I will be talking about him more than just today, but I'm going to give you a kind of illustration that he used in his tool shed. So those are the two stories that will be part one. Part two is we're just going to think about the very particular Advent pathways to joy, looking very briefly just like at the shepherds, because the angels come and say, "Great joy to all," and they're staying there with their staffs and mouths agape, and they're invited into a participation and experience of joy. And I think during this Christmas season, as we head into Christmas, you're invited into that as well. So that's where we're headed. Let's look at Psalm 16. Psalm 16 is a song of trust in God, and it's important to kind of note how this works. Look at verse 1. "Protect me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, quotes, because he's talking to himself now, the author, "You are my Lord, I have no good apart from you." Okay, so in that, you'll kind of notice that the aim of this psalm has kind of three audiences. One, God. Protect me, O God. Help me, O God. The first part is a plea for help. Okay? So you say, I thought this was about joy. It is. But we have to start in the vulnerability space, in the space where we're lacking, in the space where we're afraid, in the shadows. We have to start there, and then you'll see the progression toward joy. And so this is a prayer, this is a plea at the beginning, and then notice what it says, protect me or help me, O God, but in you I take refuge. So he's talking to God, but he's calling out to God and to anybody who will listen the reality of his heart. It's in the form of a testimony. For in you I take refuge. So help me, God, but just so you know, in you I take refuge. Then he says, I say to the Lord. Who's he talking to? I say to the Lord. He's talking to other people about what the conversation he's had with himself. So we have three different audiences here. We have God, we have the people that he's talking to, and we have the conversation he's having in his own heart and mind. Now, please understand, this is how joy works at the beginning stages. So he says, this is what I've said in my heart, whoever's listening. This is verse 2. You are my Lord, I have no good apart from you. So we have this three-way conversation going on, a prayer to God, a testimony to God and others or whoever will listen, and then this conversation in his own heart that he is in his space of vulnerability and sadness or fear or whatever the circumstances are that are troubling him. In his heart, he is talking to himself and he's saying to his heart, I have no good heart. Stephen, you listen to me now. You have no good but for God. He is the fullness of your good. Remember that, heart. Remember that, stupid person, Stephen. I'm not talking to you guys, I'm talking to me. I can say that to me. And so this is the conversation that is taking place in his heart, and this is going somewhere. Now look at the last couple of verses of the psalm. In verse 9, he gets to the point where he says, therefore my heart is glad and my soul rejoices. My body also rests secure, for you did not give me up to Sheol or death, or let your faithful one see the pit or corruption or the grave. You show me the paths of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. There's our word. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So you see, he starts in this plea, in this testifying, and in this speaking to his own heart, and then as the psalm, this prayer psalm goes, it ascends to a place where he is saying, in your presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. The reason I like this psalm is because I think it shows you an illustration of how joy works for just regular humans like you and me. It's not like you just come to a service and we hit you with the joy, bomb, and you're like, joy, joy, joy. You do the Whitney Houston kind of joy, 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 joy. And I love it, but that's not how it happens internally for us. You might have a moment of happiness or joy, but I'm talking about something deeper, something richer, something in your presence there is joy forevermore. I'm talking about a big grounding joy that can take you through 12 days of Christmas with rich joy. How did you get to that? And then how do you live in that for the rest of your life? I think this is an accurate way of describing it because the psalmist actually identifies two things in his life that are his primary challenges or spaces of vulnerability. His primary fears or his primary struggles, his primary insecurities. For this writer, which we don't know who it was, it might have been David, because in the book of Acts, Peter quotes this text and he says, David said. So I'll go with what Peter's thinking, so it could be David. But his two primary fears or concerns, you probably could guess one of them. It's the primary fear and concern of every human on the planet who isn't immortal. Anybody want to take a stab at that one? Death. His primary issue is death, which is why he says, you don't abandon me to Sheol or the grave. That's his primary predicament. The other one's a little bit more foreign to us because it plays into the covenant people of God. And one of the primary things that they were continually had to press against to be faithful was they had to make sure that they didn't fall into, anybody want to take a guess at this one? It has to do with burning incense and bowing down before pieces of wood and stone. Anybody know what this might be? Idolatry, which in the country surrounding the people of God, in this historical context, gods like Baal were worshipped, and even people were sacrificed to them, and there was all these rites that were done that involved cutting of and draining of blood and all these different things. And so the psalmist his concern is that he's got two ways of living. Those who are worshiping idols are saying, this is the pathway to well-being. You want to have a good life? Follow Baal. Offer your children in sacrifice to Baal. Cut your arms. Worship with passion before Baal. Do all these sacrificial rites, and your life will be good. That was the case they were making. And then on the other side, you had one little group of people called the people of Israel, and they were saying no to all these nations all around them across the world. They were saying, no, there's only one true God, and he doesn't require these kind of things. He has drawn us into covenant by his grace and mercy. And he's given us a way of being human that is truly beautiful and flourishing. And so, for this author, his concern is that he would fall into this broken way of living. So idolatry and death, those are his two great concerns. And so he begins there, and he asks for God's help. He talks to his own heart to confirm and affirm that his heart is truly God's, his good. There is none besides you. And so this is the pathway. So look what he says next, and then I'll tell you one more illustration. He says, the Lord is my chosen portion, this is verse 5, and my cup. You hold my lot. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I have a goodly heritage. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night, also my heart instructs me. I keep the Lord always before me because he is at my right hand. I shall not be moved. So this is not just a spiritual thing. He's looking at the very fabric of his life, at the very boundary line. He's talking about these measuring cords they would use to mark off the spaces that were allotted to the different people within the different tribes of Israel. So God's land was the promised land, and he allowed people in different spaces and different tribes to have different portions. And so he's looking at the portion he's been given by the grace of God, and he's saying, the lines have fallen for me in beautiful places. Look what God has done. And then he's at night in his bed, and it's usually at night, I don't know about you, but it's at night in your bed when things get kind of weird. You know, like scary dreams. I've had some weird ones. I once had a dream that a witch made me, I think it was I had to cut my mom's finger off. I know this is disturbing, but that's the kind of weird stuff that happens in dreams, right? And you wake up, you're like, why did I dream that? That is so disturbing, right? Because, well, it's these kind of times that things happen at night when you're in your bed. I mean, you can be not afraid of the dark, not afraid of noises, but put yourself in a house all alone with creaking things, and all of a sudden you're freaking out. And I don't care if you're 6'5" and you think you're all that. Right? Has it happened? Maybe not. Maybe I don't know because I'm not 6'5". Jay, is that true or am I? Yeah, I don't know what that feels like to be 6'5". So anyway, maybe I wouldn't be afraid if I was 6'5". That's a good point. So look at what he says though. He's at night on his bed and he could be like freaking out about the idolatry and the people who are coming against Israel. He could be freaking out about death and will his heart be abandoned to the grave? And what he says is this: I bless the Lord who gives me counsel in the night. Also my heart instructs me. Even at night, he is pressing in to knowing God, to understanding God, to listening to God. This is beautiful. And remember, this is the pathway to joy. This is how joy works. Therefore, my heart is glad and my soul rejoices and my body also rests secure. So notice the ascension here from down in this pleading, talking to his heart, and then moving up to God has blessed me in these ways practically, and now at night I'm even listening to him and being counseled by him and pressing into him, and then it moves up to this joy that he is able to experience and participate in your presence. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So that's illustration 1. Here's illustration 2. C.S. Lewis, in the past 500 years, I'd say he's one of the greatest Christian apologists that's ever lived, at least in that time frame, and probably one of my favorite creative writers and thinkers, Christian thinkers. And one of the pieces I like most that he wrote, it's in a series of kind of little articles or thoughts in a book called God in the Dock. And there's one article that I would encourage all of you to take a shot at reading at some point. It's called Meditations in a Tool Shed. But I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just going to tell you it, okay, because it's an illustration. But I think it gets to the heart of this joy thing. So basically, he says, one day I'm standing in a dark tool shed, and I notice a stream of light coming from the top of the door. And he says, at first, I start looking at the light, and I'm gazing in this dark tool shed. I can see nothing else but this light breaking from the top of the door. And you know how when you're in a place like a tool shed, all you see is the light. You see all these like fuzzy things kind of floating around. He's seeing that. He's seeing the ray of light, and he's seeing all the little sparkles and fuzzy, and he's like, oh my goodness, that's so beautiful. Like, and he's observing it from the outside. Does that make sense? That's important. He's observing this beautiful ray of light from without, from the outside. He's contemplating it, seeing it, understanding it from the outside. And then he says, but then all of a sudden I moved and I changed my position, and now the light that I was observing, now I am in the light. And he says, I'm looking through the light, through the crack, and I can see the trees outside. And he said, 10 million miles away, I can see the sun itself. And he says, there's something very different between seeing around or outside of something and seeing along something. And this is really important. He's trying to explain how we think about thought. And how we tend to think about thought is that observation of something is the most important thing, because you can remove yourself from it so that you don't have any bias, right? So you can analyze something from outside. That means you have a greater vantage point than somebody who is in the beauty going, ooh, ah. They just seem a little bit, because they're caught up in it. How can they be a viable judge of the reality of what's happening? And so he's saying in modern thought, that's how we've approached especially religion. People standing outside of religion or outside of spiritual experience are the ones kind of observing it and contemplating it. But he says, we should never be afraid to actually stand and look alongside the light, because in that there's a different kind of knowing. There's the contemplation knowing on the outside, and contemplation is good and you need that. But he said, when you're looking along the light, you're experiencing the enjoyment of it. And that's what we're trying to get to. As a church, as people following God, we are trying to move from people who stand out and analyze the Bible or analyze Jesus or analyze joy, and we're trying to step into the light and look along the light and experience the enjoyment of Jesus. Experience the enjoyment of the Scriptures. Experience the enjoyment of the believers who love Jesus hanging out together and loving each other well. And experience the enjoyment of worship. And experience the enjoyment of all these things that we've looked at from the outside most of our life. You are being invited to step and to look along the light of who Jesus is. And not just contemplate him, but enjoy him. Can you imagine? This is the journey we're on. So now, that's part one. Here's part two. Let's figure out maybe a little bit of how this looks. How do you get there? And why does Advent help? An easy place to start is Luke 2. This is a fun story. We're going to be looking at this during the Christmas service. In Luke chapter 2, you have this explanation about the coming of the Messiah. And obviously we're not going to look at the whole thing. I just want you to notice this little burst of joy. And that's when the shepherds and the angels come together. This is an exciting part, you know. They show up in the region. This is in Luke 2, verse 8. In that region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them. And they were terrified. Now, just a little note. The first time you begin to experience the enjoyment of joy, sometimes the emotional reaction might be terrifying. Because you're like, what is this? But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of," what's the phrase? I am bringing you good news of what? Great joy. Great joy. Points for him. Good news of great joy for all the people. No one's excluded. So to you is born this day in the city of David a Savior who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest of heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." And when the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds stood, and they said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord hath made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. And when they saw this, they made known what they had been told about the child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all that they had heard and seen and all that had been told them. So this is at least another pattern. We're just seeing all these pictures of movement into joy. And so for the shepherds, their story is a little different. For David in this psalm, remember, he's starting from fear and he's starting from anxiety about death and about idolatry, and he's moving toward joy. These dudes are just minding their own business out in the fields, sleeping with the sheep, and boom! They are knocked off their feet with glory. And that glory is terrifying, So the angel has to say, don't be afraid. I've got good news of great joy. But the joy's not done. Remember, see how the story goes? Glory to God in the highest. You know, they're singing, da, 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 you know, it's like, you know, and like they're all like, ah. And then, and all of a sudden it's done. Exit stage. And you can just imagine the sky bursting with a symphony, a heavenly symphony, and then nothing. And then you hear crickets. Or maybe a bird. You know, like, can you imagine the dramatic shift? Now the quest for joy begins for them. Do you see what I'm saying? Now the quest for joy begins. Like the people of God from of old, they had been waiting. And this is why Advent is so important, because it cultivates in us patience. We have to sit, we have to be quiet, we have to wait. We don't just, maybe some of you will someday experience the big burst of joy like a concert in the sky. But most of us have to live with our pain and trials and challenges and doubts and fears and sorrows, and we have to wait with patience. And the people of God have been waiting for hundreds of years with patience. And so now this patience is pointed toward a person. The joy that you are seeking will be found in one individual who will flip the world upside down. Do you want to go on this quest for joy? And so the shepherds are like, we got to go. They said he's over there. We got to go see this for ourselves. We can't just contemplate on the outside the beauty of this moment. We want to step into it. We want to be a part of it. We want to experience the deep joy that is on offer for all mankind. And so they take off, which means they left their job. I don't know if they ever came back to it. I don't know how it works back. I don't know if they got fired. Can you just leave sheep and go to another city? I don't know. That's beyond my scholarly knowledge at this point. But all I know is it didn't matter to them because the joy on offer was more important. So they take off, and notice, I love this. Notice the difference between the shepherd's response and their engagement with joy and Mary's. You have two different things going on. The shepherds are like, we found him, ooh, you know, and they're like doing chest bumps and stuff. Like that's what the text doesn't say that, but that's how I interpret it. They're excited, they're joyful, they're celebrating, and Mary's quietly sitting, and the text says, she listened to what they said, she listened to all this word, she saw all the commotion, and she ponders it in her heart. And I think both responses are completely valid, right? It's valid to celebrate with symbols, and it's valid to celebrate with quiet and pondering and reflection. But both of them are looking at the light, looking along the light toward joy. They are both participating in this quest for joy. I guess to close this morning, I want to invite you to two parts. One, to understand where you are in that illustration. Are you one who has lived your life on the outside of the beauty of the glory of Christ, considering it, which is good, by the way? We all have to do that. Just so you know, that's how knowledge and thinking works. But I want to invite you, if you've never attempted to step into the light and see along the glory of Christ, like Lewis described in that tool shed, when all of a sudden it's like the beauty of the world opened up to him by way of the light. He's no longer looking at the light. The light is allowing him to see everything else. And that is the essence of how joy works in our hearts, in our souls. I think this is something very special that you're being invited into during this Advent season, to step out of that dark tool shed, to come out of the shadows, to perceive the light of the beauty of the glory of Christ, and then by God's grace to say, Lord, I need your help. I'm freaked out by death, and I'm freaked out by, maybe yours isn't idolatry, maybe it's something else. Whatever you're freaked out by, whatever weighs on your heart, whatever the vulnerability is that threatens to crush your soul every day, you say, Lord, this is who I am, and I'm going to talk to myself, and I'm going to say, soul, your good is in God. I know you don't believe it right now, but listen to what I'm saying. You know it's true, so let's put our hope and confidence in Him, and I want to encourage you to step into that light and look into the glory of Christ. I think what will happen is that maybe for the first time in your life, you will truly begin to see everything. When C.S. Lewis came to Christ, it was a long process. It actually happened to him in a sidecar on a motorcycle headed to the zoo. It's one of the most uninspiring accounts of the transformation that takes place in your heart when you step from just contemplation to enjoyment of Jesus. He's on his way to a zoo, in the sidecar, his friend's driving him, and he said when he started toward the zoo, his heart was not awakened to the glory and beauty of Christ. But when he got to the zoo, it was. It's about he's written all kinds of stuff, and his conversion story is so simple and so beautiful. He says then he's walking in the zoo, and it's like the animals, and especially the Australian ones. I don't know why he mentions those, but they're like bouncing at his feet. And it's like all of a sudden the whole world, it's now like he is walking in Eden, he says. That's what it felt like. And that's all he says. And here's the deal. I can't turn the lights on for you like that. Never have been able to. I can't even do it in my own heart. All I can do is do what the psalmist does. And I can pray, and I can talk to my heart, and I can say, Lord, my good is in you, and I can wait for God to turn the lights on. The lights of joy, the lights of an apprehension of His glory, of understanding His beauty. I can wait with patience and determination on this quest for joy. And so I want to invite you to take the same posture and to step into the enjoyment of who Jesus is, out of the shadows into light. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes?